Montana Territory, 1873. The wind cut cold through the pines as Augustina Norray stepped out of the burned husk of her father's barn, shotgun slung across her shoulder, smoke clinging to her clothes. Her face was streaked with soot and stubborn calm. She did not cry. Not when the fire took the horses. Not when the neighbors shook their heads and called her too bold for marriage. Not when the sheriff said, "You should leave that land, Miss Norray. That place is cursed." She looked at the blackened fields and the lonely cabin still standing behind her. "I am not leaving." 2 miles down the ridge, a cowboy named Callum Tate rode into the valley, lean in the saddle, coat dusted from days of travel. He was not looking for trouble. He was not looking for her. He had come west to buy cattle and find quiet. But when he spotted the smoke rising over the ridge and saw a woman alone among ruins, something in him shifted like a compass needle finding north. Callum dismounted slow as he approached, hand slightly up. "You all right, ma'am?" "I am now," Augustina said, lifting her chin. "You with the law?" "No, just a cowboy. Name's Callum Tate." Saw the smoke and thought someone might need help. She studied him. Rough hands, weathered face, but steady eyes. She nodded once. "Augustina Norray. Fire bad. Took the barn and 2 of my horses. Wind turned fast. I tried to save them." He looked at the black pile where the barn had been. "You got anyone left?" "I have land. That is enough." The hard set of her jaw made him pause. There was something in her steel under skin. Not the kind of woman who waited to be saved. The kind who fought even after she lost. "Let me help you rebuild," he said, surprising himself. Her arms crossed. "You do not know me. I saw you didn't run. That tells me enough." Augustina stared at him a long moment like she was testing for cracks. Then, with a shrug, she turned toward the cabin. "There is stew on the stove. If you are staying, you can chop wood." He followed her without question. By the second day, Callum had cleared the rubble. Augustina worked beside him, sleeves rolled, quiet and fast. She did not ask questions. She did not smile, but she cooked good food and never told him to leave. That night, they sat on her porch watching the sky fade orange behind the mountains. Callum passed her a tin cup of coffee. "You ever think of leaving this place?" he asked. She took a slow sip. "It was my father's land. He died last spring. I buried him under that cottonwood there. I will not leave it. Neighbors do not seem helpful. They think I am too bold for marriage. I speak plain. I work like a man. That is not what they want in a wife." Callum glanced at her strong hands resting on her knees. "Maybe they are fools." She looked at him, eyes sharp. "Are you married?" "No, why not?" He hesitated. "My wife died 5 years ago. Fever took her and the baby. Since then I have kept moving." Her expression softened just slightly. "I am sorry." "Me too." They sat in silence for a while, the kind that settles easy between people who have both lost too much. By the 5th day, they had begun framing the new barn. Augustina worked with a hammer in one hand, a blueprint in her head. Callum watched her, saw how she moved like the land belonged to her veins. She never needed help, but she never pushed him away either. "Why do you stay?" he asked once, brushing sawdust from his shirt. "Because if I do not, they win," she said simply. That night, as shadows stretched long across the field, a little voice called out from the edge of the woods. Callum turned fast, hand on his revolver. Augustina was already moving. "Lena," the voice cried. A small girl stumbled into the yard, her face tear-streaked, dress torn at the hem. She could not have been more than 8. Augustina dropped to her knees. "Lettie? What happened?" "They left," the girl sobbed. "Mama and Papa said they were going to town and never came back. I waited and waited." Augustina wrapped her arms around the child, holding her tight. "It is all right. You are safe now." Callum crouched beside them. "Who is she?" "My cousin's daughter," Augustina said, her voice low. "They left the girl with me once before. I should have known they would not come back." Lettie looked up at him with big, frightened eyes. "Are you going to leave too?" Callum shook his head. "No, sweetheart. I am staying." By the 10th day, the barn stood again. Augustina and Callum worked side by side, Lettie playing nearby with a wooden horse he had carved her. At night, the three of them ate together on the porch, the little girl nestled between them. Callum found himself laughing again for the first time in years. Augustina smiled more, not wide or often, but enough to warm him to his bones. One evening, as they watched the sun dip low, Augustina turned to him. "You could leave now. The work is done." He looked at her. "Do you want me to?" She did not answer right away. Then she said, "No, I do not want to leave either," he said, voice rough. She nodded. "Then stay." He leaned in slow. She did not pull back. When their lips met, it was quiet, certain, like two people who had already chosen each other in silence. Lettie giggled behind them. "You were going to marry her." Callum chuckled, resting his forehead against Augustina's. "Maybe I am." Augustina's eyes sparkled. "Maybe I will let you." The first frost came early that year, lacing the tall grass in silver and turning the creek behind the cabin sluggish and dark. Callum stepped out before dawn, boots crunching over the stiff ground, and began splitting kindling without needing to be asked. The rhythm of the axe calmed something in him, the way work always had. Inside, Augustina stirred cornmeal into boiling water for mush, her hair still damp from the basin. Lettie rubbed sleep from her eyes and curled under a quilt near the stove, humming tunelessly to the steam that rose with breakfast. When Callum stepped back in, Augustina didn't glance up. "There's bacon left in the pan. Eat before Lettie gets to it." He set his gloves aside and leaned against the wall, watching the way the morning light caught along her cheekbone. "I'll trade you a roof mended for a second helping." She raised her brows. "You already mended that roof yesterday." "Then I'm offering credit," he said, reaching for the tin plate. She handed it to him without a word, but he caught the corner of her mouth twitch as she turned back to the stove. Later, while Lettie played with a pair of rag dolls under the table, Augustina pulled a folded paper from the shelf and laid it across the boards. Callum sat across from her, brushing aside a wood shaving that clung to his wrist. "I drew this up yesterday," she said, pointing to a rough sketch of fencing lines. "If we run split rail here and here, I can keep the yearlings separate from the older cows. I've only got 12 head left, but I aim to raise that before next spring." He studied the lines, then pointed to a slope near the back. "That ground's too soft after thaw. You'll lose posts come April." She tapped her finger once. "Then we set stone in the holes." "I've done it before." "You always plan this far ahead?" "I have to," she said, and the edge in her voice made him lift his eyes. He didn't push. Instead, he traced the edge of the paper with one calloused fingertip. "I can help you lay that fence. I've built enough of them to know what holds. I don't take favors. I'm offering partnership, not charity." Augustina looked at him, then really looked, and something quieter passed between them than words could carry. She nodded once. That afternoon, while Callum measured the slope behind the shed, Augustina saddled a dun mare and rode into town with Lettie bundled behind her. She needed salt, flour, and something warm for Lettie's feet. The general store was half-stocked and cold, its windows fogged with the breath of those gathered inside. Mrs. Prentice, the preacher's wife, narrowed her eyes the moment Augustina stepped through the door. "Didn't expect to see you back so soon," she said, voice crisp. Augustina kept her tone even. "I need supplies." The woman's gaze flicked toward Lettie. "That child yours now? She's under my care. Shame, what happened to her kin? Some folks aren't fit for children." Augustina paid in coins and said nothing. As she turned to leave, she caught the tail end of a whisper behind her. "Still living alone out there, bold as ever. No wonder no man stayed." Outside, Lettie clung to her waist. "Why were they whispering like that?" "Because they don't understand what it means to stay when it's hard," Augustina said, lifting the girl into the saddle. When they returned, dusk had settled and Callum was hauling a length of chain from the wagon bed. She handed down a parcel of oiled paper. "Darning wool," she said, "and a peppermint stick for Lettie." He took it carefully. "You always bring back something sweet?" "I believe in small mercies." He smiled. "That's a mercy I could get used to." She didn't answer, but she didn't walk away either. Instead, she stood beside him while he wound the chain into a coil, their shoulders brushing lightly in the fading light. That night, while Lettie slept curled beneath her quilt, Callum stepped outside to check the barn latches. Augustina joined him, arms crossed against the cold. "I don't know what to make of you," she said, eyes fixed on the ridge. He didn't look at her. "Because I stayed? Because you didn't ask anything of me for it." "I didn't come here to take," he said. "I came because I saw something worth standing beside." She turned toward him then, shadows moving across her face. "You barely know me. I know the way you held ground when it burned." "That's enough for me." Quiet held between them, close and unbroken. "I'm not easy," she said at last. "I didn't come for easy." He reached for her hand, slow and open. She let him take it. Her fingers were rough with work, warm from the fire. When she didn't pull away, he tilted his head just enough that their foreheads touched. They stood like that, not speaking, not needing to. The cold wind swept past them, but neither moved. The strength she carried alone for so long had found rest in his presence, and in her silence he found a promise he hadn't dared hope for in years. Inside, the lantern flickered low. The land beyond the porch stretched quiet and wide. And for the first time in a long while, there was a peace that didn't feel borrowed. By late November, the ground held the weight of winter in its breath. The woodpile stood higher now, the barn doors shut tight against the cold. Callum had taken to rising before light to check the livestock, his steps careful not to wake the house. Augustina noticed the way he moved quieter around Lettie, the way he left his gloves by the stove so she wouldn't find them stiff with frost. One morning, as she stitched patches into a torn feed sack, she said without looking up, "You ever miss Texas?" Callum rubbed his jaw, eyes on the slow curl of smoke rising from the hearth. "Sometimes. Not the land exactly. Just the knowing of it. Familiar dirt under your boots. Folks who called you by your first name." Augustina tied off her thread with a quick flick. "I never had that. Not in any place." He nodded once. "You ever want to?" She stood, folding the sack, then set it by the door. "I want Lettie to have it." "That's different." Later that day, while Lettie napped with her cheek pressed against Augustina's old shawl, Callum brought in a crate from under the wagon canvas. He set it on the table and brushed the snow from the lid. "I got this from a peddler came through the far side of the ridge last week," he said. "Didn't know if you'd want it." She opened the crate and looked down at the iron hand press nestled inside. "I saw the worn ledger you keep," he added. "Figured a press might save your fingers some effort come spring." She traced the smooth handle with her thumb, lips parted but silent. "I can take it back," he said quickly. "Didn't mean to overstep." Augustina shook her head. "No. It's good." He gave a small nod, unsure what else to say. That night, after Lettie had been tucked in and the fire burned low, Callum sat with a whittling knife, shaping a piece of pine into something he hadn't yet decided. Augustina moved through the room, folding linens, setting her father's old Bible onto the shelf where it wouldn't get knocked over again. Without looking up, she asked, "Were you always a cowboy?" "I started as a ranch hand," he said. "Didn't own a horse of my own until I was 23. Bought it with money from a branding job south of Wichita." "What was it like?" she asked, leaning against the wall with arms crossed. "Hard. Lonely, mostly. Days so empty you forget what your voice sounds like." She tilted her head. "Then why keep on?" He looked up at her, his eyes clearer in the firelight than daytime ever allowed. "Because sometimes the land gives back. Not quick, not easy, but enough." She stepped closer. "What's it given you here?" He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "A place where my name might mean something again." Augustina drew in a breath, but whatever she meant to say never came. She sat beside him, close enough their knees touched. The wind outside picked up sharp, rattling the window pane. He reached down, lifted the blanket draped over the chair's arm, and laid it across both their legs. She didn't move away. "You ever think about what comes next?" he asked quietly. "I think about surviving winter. I mean after that." Augustina traced the wood grain of the table edge with her fingertip. "I want to plant barley come April. Maybe try a milk cow if I can find one sound enough. Would you want someone to stay with you through it?" Her voice came low. If they stayed for the right reasons. Callum turned toward her, his hand resting on the worn edge of her sleeve. Would this be one of them? He didn't press, didn't lean in. Just let the question hang there, warm between them. She looked at him then, and whatever she saw softened her shoulders. I think it might be, she said. Neither of them spoke after that, not because there was nothing left to say, but because the moment needed quiet to settle. The kind of quiet that holds a promise without needing to name it. Outside, the snow began to fall. Inside, the warmth between them deepened, steady as the heat from the hearth, real as the hands they hadn't yet let go. The days shortened into deep winter. The sun barely climbed above the ridge before it dipped again, leaving the sky pale and brittle with cold. Snow had settled into the folds of the valley, and the fields lay quiet beneath a white hush. Inside the cabin, the walls held warmth steady, and life took on its winter rhythm, measured, deliberate, and close. Callum was mending a harness by lantern light while Augustina stitched a new lining into Lettie's coat. The girl sat on the floor with a small tin of buttons, sorting them by color with quiet concentration. You ever think of building on? Callum asked, threading a strip of leather through the buckle. Augustina didn't look up. Onto the house? You've got space enough on the west side. Could raise a room, maybe two. Wouldn't take much lumber come spring. She kept sewing, her voice even. You already making plans with my walls? I'm asking if you'd want to make space. For more than just getting by. She finished the last stitch, bit the thread, then smoothed the coat across her knee. I never thought past what I could do alone. But I'm not alone now. Lettie looked up from her buttons. Can I have a room with a window? Augustina brushed the girl's hair back from her brow. If the lumber holds and the weather stays fair, then yes. Callum met her eyes. We'll make it hold. Later that week, a wagon came up the road, wheels dragging slow through the rutted snow. It was driven by a man Callum hadn't seen since Wyoming, Micah Brandt, a cattle broker with a dry laugh and a knack for turning trail dust into coin. He brought 3 head of hardy stock and a crate of seed potatoes in trade for a rifle and 2 hides. You settled in, Tate? Micah asked, unloading the animals into the corral. Didn't picture you staying put. Callum glanced toward the cabin, where Augustina stood by the porch, arms folded. Lettie beside her with her scarf wrapped twice round. Found better things than drifting, he said. Micah followed his gaze, then nodded slowly. That her place. It's ours now. Micah scratched at his beard. You ever think about buying out the adjoining acres? There's 40 to the east no one's claimed since old Harker died. You could double your grazing come summer. Augustina stepped down from the porch. Who holds the deed? County clerk's got it. Folks thought no one'd want that land too rocky. She studied the ridgeline. Rocks don't scare me. Micah gave a low whistle. You always this sure of yourself? She didn't blink. Only when I'm right. That evening after the wagon rolled back down the road, Callum brought in the crate of seed and set it by the hearth. You thinking about that land? He asked. I'm more than thinking about it, she said. I'm going to file come thaw. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed. You planning to run more cattle, or something else? Barley if the ground takes. Maybe some flax. Let the cattle feed higher up and keep the grain near the house. He watched her for a moment, then said, You've already mapped it in your head. I've walked that ridge since I was a girl. I know what it can give. You ever let anyone in on those plans before? She ran a hand through her hair, fingers catching in the braid. No one ever stayed long enough to hear them. Callum stepped closer. Well, I'm listening now. She didn't say anything for a long while, but when she turned, her hand slid into his like it belonged there. The next morning, Augustina woke to the creak of floorboards and the smell of coffee. Callum had stoked the fire and was feeding the chickens before first light. Lettie stood on a stool beside the table, carefully arranging 3 tin cups. I'm helping, she said proudly. Augustina kissed the top of her head. You're doing good work. They ate together while the wind howled outside, and afterward Augustina pulled a folded parcel from the cupboard. I've been keeping this since last year. She unwrapped it slowly, a pair of wool-lined gloves, worn soft at the seams but still good. "These were my father's," she said, setting them in front of Callum. "He'd have liked you." Callum picked them up, turning them over in his hands. "Are you sure?" She looked at him without hesitation. "I wouldn't offer if I wasn't." He didn't answer right away, just slid his fingers into the gloves one by one. They fit snug, like they'd been waiting for someone with hands that knew work. Afterward, he followed her out to the shed where the tools waited under canvas. She handed him a saw and nodded toward the western wall. "We'll need stronger joists if we're adding a room." He looked at the boards, then back at her. "You still want that window for Lettie?" "And one facing south for me," she said. He grinned. "You asking for morning light? I want to see what's coming before it arrives." They worked until the sun touched the tops of the trees, then stood side by side in the snow, the beginnings of a new frame rising behind them. Callum brushed sawdust from his coat. "You ever think about what folks'll say come spring?" Augustina tightened the scarf at her neck. "They'll say what they've always said." He turned toward her. "And you?" She looked up at him, eyes steady. "I'll say I built a life with a man who knew how to stay." He reached for her hand, and this time she didn't wait to meet him halfway. The snow began to soften by early March. Not melt not yet, but turn wet around the edges, slumping off fence posts and loosening in the trees. The cabin's eaves dripped through the afternoons, and the sky brightened just enough to make the days stretch longer. The ridge beyond the pasture still held its crust of white, but the air no longer bit so sharp. Callum stood by the corral gate, watching the herd nose through the packed ground. Augustina approached from the root cellar, a basket of potatoes looped over one arm. Her boots sank with each step. "You think the road'll open by next week?" she asked, shifting the basket to her hip. "If the wind doesn't turn again," Callum said. "Why?" "I want to file the land claim before the thaw floods the creek." He wiped his hands on his trousers. "I'll ride into town with you. I can handle it." "I know. I'd still like to go." She gave a single nod and walked past him toward the porch. At the top step, she paused. "You ever think about making it official?" He looked up. "You mean the land?" "No," she said. "Us." He didn't answer right away, but the way he climbed the steps told her he'd already considered it. "Would you want that?" he asked. "I wouldn't have asked if I didn't." She set the basket down by the door. "I've never done it before." "Neither have I, not like this." She turned, her back to the door. "Then we figure it out. Together." When they rode into town 3 days later, the roads were half mud, half ice. Lettie sat bundled between them on the wagon seat, wrapped in a wool shawl and humming a tune she'd picked up from a visitor weeks before. The town was quieter than usual, with most folks waiting for the full thaw to make their errands. Callum helped Augustina down from the wagon near the clerk's office, then lifted Lettie after. "We'll meet you by the store," he said. "Take your time." Inside, the air was dry and smelled faintly of ink and old coal. Augustina signed the papers with a steady hand, standing straight as the clerk made his notes. When she stepped outside again, the sun had climbed higher than it had in weeks. She walked toward the general store where Callum stood with Lettie beside a crate of seed packets, the girl pointing excitedly at a paper envelope held between her mittened hands. "She wants to grow sweet peas," he said as Augustina approached. "Says the porch needs color." Augustina took the packet and turned it over. "We'll plant them by the south wall. They'll catch the afternoon sun." That afternoon, they returned home with the wagon full barley seed, a pair of iron hinges, and a hand-carved sign Callum had quietly commissioned weeks earlier. He waited until they'd unharnessed the team and brought the supplies inside before he pulled it from the wagon bed. Augustina brushed the sawdust from the edge. "You made this." "Had it made," he said. "I told the man exactly what to carve." She turned it over in her hands. The grain of the wood was dark and clean, and the letters had been etched smooth. "Norray Tate Homestead." She didn't smile, but her eyes did something quieter and deeper. "We'll hang it after supper," she said, setting it gently by the door. That night, while Lettie slept curled beneath her new quilt and the wind tapped soft against the shutters, Augustina lit a single lamp and sat across from Callum at the table. "No preacher for miles," she said. "And the one in town doesn't think highly of me." Callum reached across, took her hand. "We don't need anyone else to say what we already know." She looked at their joined hands. "Then say it." "I love you, Augustina. I want to build every season with you." I want to raise Lettie beside you. I want to work this land until my bones won't carry me anymore, and even then I'll stay. She nodded once. I love you, too. You never tried to change me. That's the only kind of love I believe in. They stood, and he took her face in his hands, kissed her with the same quiet certainty that had grown between them from the moment he stepped through the smoke and ash of her past. Spring came slow but sure. The ground softened. Snow thinned into rivulets that fed the creek and soaked the fields. Lettie planted her sweet peas in a tidy line along the cabin wall. Augustina sowed the barley with Callum walking beside her, the seeds dropping steady from her hand. The new room rose board by board. Lettie's window faced the eastern ridge. Augustina's faced south. Callum built a porch swing from scrap pine, and some evenings they sat there together, not speaking, just listening to the land breathe again. Neighbors began to visit, not many, but enough. One brought a milk cow on trade. Another offered preserves in exchange for fence help. The whispers faded. The work remained. One morning, Callum hung the sign above the porch. Norray Tate Homestead. Caught the early light and held it. Inside, Augustina braided Lettie's hair, while the girl practiced writing her name on a slate. Callum watched them from the doorway, something steady and full rising in his chest. This was theirs. Not given. Not borrowed. Built, day by day, from ash and frost and quiet trust. And it would last.